1884, the French government sent the greatest scientific minds in the world to shut down a doctor named Anton Mesmer. Benjamin Franklin was on the panel, Antoine Lavoisier, the astronomer Jean-Sylvain Bailly. Mesmer claimed that he could heal people by passing his hands near their bodies. He said an invisible force, he called it animal magnetism, flowed between living things and that a trained healer could move it. Thousands of Parisians had experienced his treatment. They reported relief from paralysis, chronic pain, even blindness. They trembled, they wept. Some of them claimed that they were cured. The commission investigated for months. Then they published their conclusion. Imagination, not magnetism, was the cause of the cures. Mesmer fled Paris. He died in obscurity. And for the next 200 years, the history books said Mesmer was debunked. But here's what the history books left out. 2 centuries later, in double-blind laboratory conditions, researchers would discover that hand passes near the human body could produce measurable physiological effects even when the subjects had no idea it was happening. Franz Anton Mesmer was a trained physician who graduated from the University of Vienna in 1766. He believed that a magnetic-like force permeated living bodies, and that skilled practitioners could direct it through specific hand movements called passes. The healer's hands would move slowly through the air near the patient's body, not touching, following the lines of what Mesmer believed were invisible energy channels. Patients reported feeling warmth, tingling, and pressure. Many entered altered states. Many reported lasting relief. His practice on Place Vendôme became the most fashionable destination in Paris. Aristocrats and intellectuals lined up. The king's court took notice. That's when Louis XVI commissioned the investigation. The Franklin Commission was rigorous by the standards of its time. In their key experiments, they blindfolded subjects and told them that either a magnetized object was nearby, when it wasn't, or that nothing was present when a magnetized object was there. Subjects responded to what they believed, not to what was actually there. Their conclusion was, imagination was sufficient to explain the phenomena. They did not claim to have proven that the magnetic fluid doesn't exist. They had no instrument to detect it. They proved only that imagination could reproduce the effects without it. That distinction matters because what happened next is one of the more interesting things in the history of science. Mesmer was expelled from Parisian intellectual life, but his followers kept working. His techniques crossed the Atlantic and took root most deeply in Brazil, where they were absorbed into a spiritual tradition called Kardecism, founded by the French educator Allan Kardec in the 1850s. Kardec documented the magnetic pass as a genuine healing technique in his work The Medium's Book in 1861, describing it in almost identical terms to Mesmer's original practice. In Brazil, the passe magnética, the magnetic pass, became part of everyday Kardecist practice. Millions of Brazilians experienced it. Spiritist healing centers operated in every city. And then, in the late 20th century, Brazilian researchers did something no one had done with Mesmer's technique since 1784. They tested it. Not in salons, not with eager aristocrats, but in double-blind, sham-controlled laboratory conditions where neither the subjects nor the evaluating researchers knew what was happening. The results were published in peer-reviewed journals, including Complementary Therapies in Medicine and Explore, the Journal of Science and Healing. What they found was that subjects receiving genuine magnetic passes showed measurable physiological changes compared to sham controls. Changes in EEG activity, heart rate variability shifts. In some studies, differences in skin conductance and cortisol response. These were not subjective reports. These were instrument readings in blinded conditions. Mesmer's technique, stripped of his theory, stripped of his salon theatrics, stripped of everything except the hand movements and the healer's mental state, produced measurable effects on the human body even when the subjects didn't know it was happening. The Commission's 1784 conclusion was specific. Imagination is sufficient to explain the phenomena. But by the time the story made it into history textbooks, that precise conclusion had been replaced by something much more blunt, that Mesmer was a fraud Animal magnetism doesn't exist, case closed. That's not what the commission said, but it's what got remembered. And because Mesmer's theory was discredited, his technique went with it. The idea that hand passes near the body could produce real effects seemed like exactly the kind of unscientific mysticism that 19th century medicine was trying to move away from. What survived was the part the commission did validate, that the mind produces powerful effects on the body. That turned into hypnotherapy, which is legitimate, it's studied, and it's used clinically today. What didn't survive, because it couldn't be explained, was the physical phenomena itself. The magnetic pass disappeared from Western science. It survived only in Brazil, embedded in a religious tradition that mainstream medicine wasn't paying attention to. And there it waited, practiced millions of times a year in spiritist centers across a continent until researchers started measuring it. The Brazilian research on the magnetic pass is part of a broader scientific story that's just beginning to get traction. We know that the human body generates real magnetic fields. That's not mysticism, it's the basis of magnetoencephalography, or MEG, which maps brain activity by detecting the tiny magnetic signals that neurons produce. The technology works because the body is genuinely electromagnetic. We know that external magnetic fields affect biological tissue. Transcranial medical stimulation, TMS, is FDA approved for depression. It works by pointing a magnetic coil at the skull and inducing electrical changes in the brain. Pulsed electromagnetic field therapy is FDA cleared for bone healing. And we know that the human brain contains magnetite, the same mineral that allows migratory birds to navigate by the Earth's magnetic field, confirmed in brain tissue by research at Caltech in 1992, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Now, none of this proves Mesmer's specific theory. The magnetic fluid he described may not exist the way he imagined it, but the broader question he was asking, whether living bodies interact with each other through some field-based mechanism, is very much alive in the peer-reviewed literature. Here's what I find interesting. Mesmer's technique was tested in 1784. The commission proved that imagination was sufficient to explain the effects. Then his technique was practiced, largely undisturbed, for 200 years in the spiritist centers of Brazil. And then when researchers finally put it back in a lab, with modern equipment, blinded conditions, and instrument readings, they found effects that imagination alone doesn't explain. What exactly is being transferred when a trained healer moves his hands near your body? Is it electromagnetic? Is it thermal? Is it some variation of the intentional biofield effects that mainstream researchers at places like the Institute of Heart Math are still trying to quantify? The 1784 Commission asked the right questions but had the wrong tools. What do you think about this? Let me know in the comments. And if you'd like to learn more about forgotten science that's been buried by the mainstream establishment, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next one.